My son-in-law called me a loser at dinner while living in the house I paid for. I simply asked how it felt to know I'd never pay another bill of his. Then I watched his million-dollar world vanish. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. The expensive Cabernet swirled in Sheldon's glass like a victory lap. I sat at the head of my own mahogany table, the one I'd paid for, watching my son-in-law grin at me. He leaned back, his chest puffed out like a balloon. "Mark," he said, his voice dripping with that fake pity that makes your skin crawl. "Retirement must be nice. No pressure, no deadlines, no real responsibilities." Everyone at the table laughed, a sharp, jagged sound that cut through the candlelight. I set my fork down. The prime rib on my plate was suddenly cold. Sheldon's promotion to regional sales manager had turned him into a different man, or maybe it just finally let the real one out. He looked at the crystal holders and the fine wine I'd brought as a gift, then looked back at me. "I mean, don't get me wrong, you had a decent run as an engineer, but that was what, 40 years ago? Different world now. Everything's digital, fast-paced, takes a younger mind to really succeed." My daughter Caroline shifted uncomfortably beside me. Her gold bracelet, a gift from me last Christmas, caught the light as she reached for her water. "Sheldon," she started, her voice thin. "Dad had a wonderful career. He designed infrastructure that's still standing." Sheldon waved her off with a flick of his wrist. Sure. But let's be honest, when was the last time you actually built something, accomplished something significant?" My granddaughter Emma looked up from her dinner. Her eyes were wide and innocent. "Grandpa built me a treehouse last summer," she said. Sheldon patted her head, but his eyes never left mine. "That's sweet, honey. But Grandpa needs to understand that real men provide for their families through their own hard work. Not everyone can just coast through retirement while others carry the weight." The silence that followed was heavy. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Caroline tried to fill it with a nervous laugh. "Maybe we should talk about something else. Emma, tell Grandpa about your piano recital." But Sheldon was just getting started. The wine had made him bold, and the power of his new six-figure salary was intoxicating. "Actually, I've been thinking," he said, leaning forward. "Now that I'm making real money, it might be time for everyone to start pulling their own weight." I knew that look. For 15 years, I had quietly covered the gaps. I had paid the mortgage help, the private school tuitions, the BMW lease, and the medical bills. I had watched him spend money like water while I stood in the shadows with my checkbook. "Take Caroline, for instance," Sheldon continued, gesturing toward my daughter. "She's been out of the workforce so long, living off, well, let's call it family charity. Maybe it's time she rejoined the real world." Caroline's face went white. She knew the truth as well as I did. Their entire lifestyle was a house of cards I had built for them. The kitchen renovation they just finished? That was me. The elite summer camps? Me. My grandson Tommy looked at his father, his voice trembling. "Are we in trouble, Dad?" Sheldon didn't miss a beat. "No, son, but it's important to understand the difference between earners and dependents, between providers and those who've given up trying." He looked directly at me. The insult was a physical blow. Caroline's fingers trembled as she gripped her wine glass. Sheldon mistook my silence for defeat. "I don't mean to be harsh, Mark, but when was the last time you contributed something meaningful? When did you last feel the satisfaction of earning your own way instead of just existing?" He paused, savoring the moment. "How does it feel to be a loser?" I didn't flinch. I took a slow sip of water and set the glass down with a precise click. The sound seemed to echo in the room. "How does it feel?" I asked, my voice steady and cold. "To know that this loser will no longer be paying your bills?" The color drained from Sheldon's face so fast it was like someone had pulled a plug. Caroline's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes darting between us. The triumphant smirk on Sheldon's face crumbled into a mask of pure panic. I didn't wait for an answer. I went back to my dinner, cutting the meat with deliberate care. The table was a graveyard of silence. Outside, the March wind rattled the window pane, and a distant dog barked, but inside, the only sound was the scrape of my knife against the plate. After an eternity, I wiped my mouth with the linen napkin. I stood up, walked over to Emma and Tommy, and kissed their foreheads. "Thank you for dinner, Caroline," I said. It was delicious. I grabbed my coat from the closet and walked out the door. The cool night air felt like a benediction. I got into my truck, the 15-year-old vehicle Sheldon always mocked, and drove home in total silence. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my chest felt tight. I had made a promise to my wife Martha on her deathbed in 2008. I told her I'd make sure Caroline was secure. For 15 years, I had kept that promise at the expense of my own dreams. I pulled into my driveway and walked straight to my study. The room smelled of old paper and furniture polish. I clicked on the desk lamp and stared at the row of filing cabinets. As an engineer, I kept everything. Every receipt, every bank statement, every canceled check. I opened the first drawer labeled 2009. The blue folders for mortgage help were thick. The green ones for auto loans were even heavier. I started spreading them out on the desk. The numbers began to form a long, jagged line under the lamplight. $2,800 every month for the mortgage. I ran the numbers on my calculator. That was $4,000 alone. Then I pulled the green folders. Sheldon's BMW lease, Caroline's SUV, wanting $200 a month for 8 years. Another $115,200. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. I had forgotten how deep this went. The yellow folders held the private school tuitions. Tommy from kindergarten to 7th grade, Emma from preschool to 4th, $24,000 annually. Over 16 combined years of education, that was $192,000. I didn't stop. I pulled the red folders for medical bills, Sheldon's insurance premiums when he was between jobs, Caroline's therapy sessions, the children's dental work. $8,000 a year for 15 years came to $120,000. I found the vacation receipts tucked in the back. Disney World in 2015, the European cruise in 2018, the ski lodges, the Christmas presents that I let Sheldon take credit for. I added in the $45,000 I gave them for the kitchen renovation last fall. My finger hit the total button on the calculator. $976,200, nearly $1 million. I sat back in my leather chair, the one Martha had given me for our anniversary, and stared at the number. I had given them $1 million while I lived in a modest 2-bedroom house. I had abandoned my hobbies, stopped traveling, and even ignored the woman from church who kept asking me to dinner because I was too busy managing my daughter's life. I looked at the travel brochures for Scotland and Italy that I'd been collecting for a decade. They were covered in dust. It was 10:30 p.m. when I picked up the phone. My bank had an automated line for scheduled payments, and I knew exactly which accounts were linked to Sheldon's life. I went down my list with the precision of a man dismantling a bridge. Mortgage assistance, canceled. BMW lease payment, canceled. Private school tuition, canceled. Health insurance premiums, canceled. Utility transfers, canceled. I recorded every confirmation number in my notebook. By midnight, the financial architecture of their lives had been stripped down to the foundation. I went to bed and slept better than I had in years. Sunday morning, I sat at my kitchen table watching the sparrows fight over crumbs. At 11:47, the phone rang. It was Caroline. Her voice was full of confusion, not fear yet. "Dad, something weird happened with our mortgage payment," she said. "The bank called saying there were insufficient funds. That doesn't make sense." I took a sip of my coffee. "It makes perfect sense, Caroline," I said. "You assumed I'd keep paying forever." The color drained from Sheldon's face so fast it was like someone had pulled a plug. Caroline's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes darting between us. The triumphant smirk on Sheldon's face crumbled into a mask of pure panic. I didn't wait for an answer. I went back to my dinner, cutting the meat with deliberate care. The table was a graveyard of silence. Outside, the March wind rattled the window pane and a distant dog barked, but inside, the only sound was the scrape of my knife against the plate. After an eternity, I wiped my mouth with the linen napkin. I stood up, walked over to Emma and Tommy, and kissed their foreheads. "Thank you for dinner, Caroline," I said. It was delicious. I grabbed my coat from the closet and walked out the door. The cool night air felt like a benediction. I got into my truck, The 15-year-old vehicle Sheldon always mocked and drove home in total silence. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my chest felt tight. I had made a promise to my wife Martha on her deathbed in 2008. I told her I'd make sure Caroline was secure. For 15 years, I had kept that promise at the expense of my own dreams. I pulled into my driveway and walked straight to my study. The room smelled of old paper and furniture polish. I clicked on the desk lamp and stared at the row of filing cabinets. As an engineer, I kept everything. Every receipt, every bank statement, every canceled check. I opened the first drawer labeled 2009. The blue folders for mortgage help were thick. The green ones for auto loans were even heavier. I started spreading them out on the desk. The numbers began to form a long, jagged line under the lamplight. $2,800 every month for the mortgage. I ran the numbers on my calculator. That was $504,000 alone. Then I pulled the green folders. Sheldon's BMW lease, Caroline's SUV, $1,200 a month for 8 years. Another $115,200. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. I had forgotten how deep this went. The yellow folders held the private school tuitions. Tommy from kindergarten to 7th grade. Emma from preschool to 4th. $24,000 annually. Over 16 combined years of education. That was $192,000. I didn't stop. I pulled the red folders for medical bills. Sheldon's insurance premiums when he was between jobs. Caroline's therapy sessions. The children's dental work. $8,000 a year for 15 years came to $120,000. I found the vacation receipts tucked in the back. Disney World in 2015. The European cruise in 2018. The ski lodges, the Christmas presents that I let Sheldon take credit for. I added in the $45,000 I gave them for the kitchen renovation last fall. My finger hit the total button on the calculator. $976,200, nearly $1 million. I sat back in my leather chair, the one Martha had given me for our anniversary, and stared at the number. I had given them $1 million while I lived in a modest 2-bedroom house. I had abandoned my hobbies, stopped traveling, and even ignored the woman from church who kept asking me to dinner because I was too busy managing my daughter's life. I looked at the travel brochures for Scotland and Italy that I'd been collecting for a decade. They were covered in dust. It was 10:30 p.m. when I picked up the phone. My bank had an automated line for scheduled payments, and I knew exactly which accounts were linked to Sheldon's life. I went down my list with the precision of a man dismantling a bridge. Mortgage assistance, canceled. BMW lease payment, canceled. Private school tuition, canceled. Health insurance premiums, canceled. Utility transfers, canceled. I recorded every confirmation number in my notebook. By midnight, the financial architecture of their lives had been stripped down to the foundation. I went to bed and slept better than I had in years. Sunday morning, I sat at my kitchen table watching the sparrows fight over crumbs. At 11:47, the phone rang. It was Caroline. Her voice was full of confusion, not fear yet. "Dad, something weird happened with our mortgage payment," she said. "The bank called saying there were insufficient funds. That doesn't make sense." I took a sip of my coffee. "It makes perfect sense, Caroline," I said. "You assumed I'd keep paying forever." Sheldon straightened his shoulders, trying to claw back some of his dignity. "We'll see about this," he sneered. "There are lawyers who specialize in elder financial abuse." I almost laughed. "Please call them," I said. "I'd love to show them the receipts of how I've been abused for 15 years. They left without another word, the BMW engine screaming as they sped away. I sat in my armchair and stared at the wedding photo on the mantel. 2007. Sheldon had been a humble guy then, driving an old Honda and calling me sir. When Martha died in 2009, they were struggling. The recession hit, and Sheldon's job was on the line. I stepped in because I loved them, but over time, the thank you notes stopped. The weekend visits turned into Sheldon drinking my beer and complaining about his boss. Caroline's calls became a list of demands. I had become invisible, just a source of capital. The next 3 days were like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. Monday morning, Caroline called me in a panic. The bank slapped them with a $75 penalty. If they didn't have $2,175 by the next day, the foreclosure process would start. I said nothing and hung up. By noon, the BMW lease company was leaving messages about a missed $650 payment. Caroline's SUV loan bounced too. Their homeowner's insurance lapsed at 3:01 p.m. Tuesday was worse. Sheldon was shouting in the background of Caroline's call. "We can't cover everything," she screamed. "I applied at Target and Walmart. They're offering $12 an hour. That's barely $2,000 a month." For the first time in 15 years, she was actually doing the math of survival. I drove past their house on Wednesday and saw Tommy and Emma standing outside Centura Academy. The school had called. They needed $4,800 immediately or the kids were out. My neighbor, Mrs. Payne, stopped me during my walk that evening. She looked concerned. "I heard some shouting at your daughter's house," she said. "Something about credit cards being maxed out." I just nodded. Thursday brought the most desperate call yet. "Dad, please," Caroline whispered. "I went to 5 interviews. They all want recent references, but I haven't worked since 2009. Her voice had lost the edge. It was pure humility now. "Sheldon tried to pay the mortgage," she said. "We have $3,000 in the account. He paid the $2,175, but then he realized we didn't have money for food or gas. He had to call the bank back and cancel the payment. The BMW was scheduled for repossession on Monday. They needed $850 to stop it." "I think we're going to lose everything," she sobbed. "Yes," I said quietly. "You probably are." I spent Friday morning looking at my new financial plan. I was finally going to book that European river cruise. But then my friend Dave from the hardware store called. "Mark, I heard something troubling," he said. "Sheldon was at Murphy's bar telling everyone you cut them off out of spite. He's calling it financial abandonment of innocent grandchildren." My heart went cold. By Tuesday, Caroline had called Martha's sister, Janet. Janet phoned me, her voice tight with judgment. "Caroline says you've abandoned them in their time of need," she said. "She said the kids don't think you love them anymore." "Did she mention the $976,000 I've given them?" I asked. The silence on Janet's end lasted a full 10 seconds. "What?" she whispered. "Nearly $1 million, I told her. I have the documents for every penny." The gossip mill began to turn against Sheldon. Wednesday morning, my granddaughter Emma called me. Her voice sounded rehearsed. "Grandpa, Mommy says we might lose our house because you don't want to help us. Did we do something wrong?" My chest ached, but I kept my voice gentle. "You did nothing wrong, sweetheart," I said. "I'll pick you up for ice cream this afternoon." When I got to the house, Caroline was watching from the window with eyes that looked like they were calculating my worth. At the ice cream shop, Emma's sadness vanished as she talked about her art project. But when I dropped her off, I saw a woman from the neighborhood, Nancy Morrison, glare at me from her driveway. She actually followed me to the grocery store later that day. "Mark Bennett, I'm ashamed of you," she shouted in the middle of the aisle. "Cutting off your daughter. What would Martha think?" I turned my cart around and looked her right in the eyes. "Martha would think $1 million in 15 years was plenty," I said. Nancy's face went pale. "$1 million?" she asked. $976,200 to be exact, I told her. "Mortgage, cars, tuition, vacations. Do you want to see the bank records?" The other shoppers stopped to listen. Nancy's face turned bright red. "Caroline never mentioned that," she muttered. "That's because Caroline only mentions what she wants, not what she gets," I said. That evening, Dave called again. Sheldon was back at the bar, but Bill Henderson was there. Bill sold them that BMW. He asked Sheldon how he could afford a $60,000 car on his salary when he was complaining about money. When Sheldon tried to lie, Bill mentioned that I had co-signed the lease. The bar went silent. Sheldon left in a hurry. Friday evening, I was watering my roses when Mrs. Payne approached me. She told me the parents at school were talking. "Some people are questioning the story your son-in-law is telling," she said. "They know how much you love those kids." Saturday morning, Caroline called, her voice shrill. "You're destroying our reputation," she screamed. "People are asking uncomfortable questions." "I'm not destroying anything," I said. "I'm just no longer subsidizing your lies." She hung up on me. But reality was closing in. Monday morning, Dave called. "There's a foreclosure notice on your daughter's door, Mark. Big official thing. They had 30 days to pay $8,625 or they were out. On Tuesday, the BMW was gone. It was replaced by a 10-year-old Honda Civic." Sheldon looked defeated as he walked to the car. "I saw Caroline at the grocery store on Wednesday. She was wearing a blue vest with a name tag, scanning items with mechanical precision. When a neighbor came through her line, Caroline's face turned deep red. She looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped. That evening, my grandson Tommy called me, crying. 'Grandpa, Mom, and Dad are fighting really loud. They're saying mean things about you. Mom said they ruined it themselves, and Dad slammed the door.' On Friday, Sheldon showed up on my porch. His corporate confidence was dead. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie was loose, and his face was gray. 'Mark, I need to talk to you,' he said, just man to man. I invited him in. He sat in the chair and looked at his hands. 'The foreclosure is real,' he whispered. 'Caroline's making $13.50 an hour. I'm bringing home $5,800. The mortgage is nearly $3,000. We can't make it work. We never could we? Without you.' 'No,' I said. 'You never could.' Sheldon looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of a man I could respect. 'I never earned anything, did I?' he asked. His voice cracked. 'The house, the cars, none of it was mine.' 'What do you want, Sheldon?' I asked. 'I want to know if there's a way back,' he said. 'Not to how things were, but to something better.' I looked at Sheldon, really looked at him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow stare of a man who finally realized his life was a stage set held up by someone else's money. Saturday afternoon brought the second half of the storm. Caroline showed up on my porch, still wearing her grocery store vest. She looked smaller, her entitled confidence replaced by the same raw desperation she had at Martha's funeral. She collapsed into the armchair and stared at her name tag. 4 days, she whispered. 4 days until the foreclosure is final. Tommy's asking if we're going to be homeless. Emma's having nightmares. She looked at me with eyes that were finally clear of manipulation. 'I've been on my feet for 40 hours this week, Dad. People I used to have lunch with are coming through my line and looking at me with pity. I wanted to die.' 'But you didn't,' I said. 'No,' she replied. 'I asked them paper or plastic, because I finally understand what earning a living actually means.' She told me Sheldon had mentioned our talk. She asked if there was a way forward. I leaned in. 'Here is the deal,' I said. 'I will pay the children's tuition directly. I will cover their clothes, their medical, and their activities. I will set up college funds they can't touch until they're 18. Caroline's face lit up, but I held up a hand. 'But,' I continued, 'I will not pay your mortgage. I will not pay for your cars. I will not pay for your lifestyle. You and Sheldon will live on what you actually earn. Period.' 'We'll downsize,' she said quickly. 'We'll find a smaller place.' 'There's more,' I said. 'I want public acknowledgement. I want a letter in the community paper and a post on social media thanking me for 15 years and the $1 million I provided. I want the lies to stop. Sheldon will never agree to that,' she whispered. 'His pride.' 'Then his pride is more important than his kids,' I said. 'You have 48 hours to decide.' I watched her drive away in that old Honda. I knew a brutal conversation was about to happen in their kitchen. My neighbor Dave told me later that the shouting went on for hours. Sheldon didn't want to humiliate himself. He wanted to file for bankruptcy or get a predatory loan. But Caroline pulled out a calculator. She showed him the math. $6,900 in total income. $3,000 for the mortgage. After the car, insurance, utilities, and food, they had nothing left for the kids, not even for a pair of shoes. Sheldon paced the kitchen until he saw the look in his daughter's eyes. Emma was at the top of the stairs, crying, asking if they were going to be homeless. The math didn't lie, and for the first time, neither did Sheldon. Monday morning at 10:15, the Honda pulled into my driveway. All 4 of them got out. Sheldon looked like he hadn't slept in a week. They came into my living room and stood like defendants in a courtroom. 'Dad, we accept,' Caroline said. 'The bank called this morning. We have until 3 p.m. to pay $8,625 or it's over.' Sheldon cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Mark, I need to say this." He looked at the photo of Martha. "I took your help and I turned it into a lie. I told people I was the success. I let my kids think I was the provider when it was always you. I'm sorry." Caroline took Emma's hand and looked at me. "I treated your love like an inheritance," she said. "I acted like I deserved it. I was wrong." I pulled out my checkbook. "This is the last mortgage payment I ever make for you," I said. "After today, you sink or swim on your own." As I dialed the bank to arrange the emergency transfer, I heard Emma whisper to her mom, "Are we going to be okay?" Caroline's voice was soft but steady. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be just fine." For the first time in 15 years, I believed her. The transformation didn't happen overnight. The first month was a gauntlet of reality. Sheldon had to sell the remaining furniture from the guest rooms to cover the first utility bill that I wasn't paying. Caroline stayed at the grocery store taking every overtime shift they offered. They didn't go out to dinner. They didn't buy new clothes. The community paper published the letter that Friday. It was simple and honest. It detailed the support I'd given and apologized for the misconceptions. The social media post followed. The comments were a mix of shock and respect, but the lies were officially dead. Sheldon told me later that walking back into Murphy's bar after that letter was the hardest thing he'd ever done, but Bill Henderson bought him a beer and told him he finally looked like a man. By the second month, the "for sale" sign went up in their yard. They realized that even with the mortgage caught up, they couldn't sustain a house that large on their own. They found a modest 3-bedroom rental on the other side of town. It was older, and the kitchen didn't have the granite I'd paid for, but it was theirs. I watched them move. Sheldon didn't hire movers this time. He and a few guys from work loaded the truck themselves. I saw him sweating, carrying boxes, and laughing with his colleagues. He looked younger. The stress of maintaining a fake life had been replaced by the honest exhaustion of building a real one. I started seeing them differently. Our monthly dinners weren't about me handing over checks anymore. They were about the kids' grades and Sheldon's actual progress at work. In June, Emma came running into my house with a medal around her neck. "Grandpa, I won the soccer tournament," she cheered. I looked at her grass-stained knees and her beaming face. "Tell me about the winning goal," I said. Tommy showed me his report card. Straight A's. His teacher wrote a note saying his confidence had skyrocketed. It turns out, when kids see their parents working hard and being honest, they feel more secure than any amount of my money could ever make them feel. Caroline sat on the porch with me that evening. She looked at her hands, which were rougher now from work. "Dad, I can't thank you enough," she said. "Not for the money, for stopping. I didn't know how to be an adult because you never let me fail." "I'm proud of you, Caroline," I said. She smiled, and it was the same radiant smile she had in the wedding photo from 2007. Sheldon joined us carrying a tray of lemonade. He asked me for advice on a promotion he was eyeing. It involved more travel and more responsibility, and he wanted to know if I thought they could handle the kids' schedule. We sat there for hours, talking like a real family. As the summer ended, the lessons of the spring had become habits. Sheldon got that promotion. It wasn't because of a fake image or a fancy car. It was because his boss saw a man who was finally focused and reliable. He didn't buy a new car with the raise. He put it into an emergency fund. Caroline was promoted to shift supervisor. She told me she actually enjoyed the work. It gave her a sense of purpose she'd been missing for a decade. They were living in that small rental, and the kids were thriving in public school. They didn't miss the elite academies. They had friends in the neighborhood who played in the street until the lights came on. I finally booked my trip. A month in Scotland and Italy. When I told the family at dinner, Tommy and Emma cheered. "You deserve it, Grandpa," Tommy shouted. Sheldon shook my hand. "Bring back plenty of photos, Mark. We've got everything under control here." I looked around the room. The mahogany table was gone, sold to pay down their debts, replaced by a simple pine one they'd bought at a flea market. But the laughter at this table was real. There was no tension, no hidden agendas, no unspoken demands. I realized that the $1 million I'd spent over 15 years hadn't been an investment in their happiness. It had been a ransom for their character. By taking the money away, I'd finally given them the chance to be the people Martha always knew they could be. The loser Sheldon had mocked at dinner was gone, and so was the arrogant winner he thought he was. In their place were people I actually wanted to spend time with. The evening before I left for the airport, Emma gave me a card she'd made. It had glitter and a drawing of a treehouse. "I love you, Grandpa," it said. "Thank you for everything." I stood at my window that night, watching the moon over the trees. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The storm that had been brewing for 15 years had finally passed, leaving the air clear. I thought about the revenge I'd sought that night at the dinner table. I thought I wanted to punish them, to make them feel the weight of their own entitlement. But as I packed my bags for the Highlands, I realized the real victory wasn't seeing them struggle. It was seeing them succeed without me. The flight to Edinburgh was long, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about what was happening back home. I spent 2 weeks hiking the hills and taking photos of the old stone bridges. I sent postcards to the kids every few days. From a small cafe in Glencoe, I got a text from Caroline. It was a photo of their first monthly budget with a 0 at the bottom of the debt column. "We did it, Dad," the message read. I sat there in the Scottish mist and felt a tear prick my eye. They were free. When I moved on to Italy, I took a cooking class in a village outside Florence. I met a woman there, a widow from Chicago named Elena. We spent an afternoon talking about our families and our losses. I told her the story of the last 6 months. She reached across the table and touched my hand. "You gave them the greatest gift a father can give," she said. "You gave them back to themselves." I realized she was right. I wasn't just a retired engineer anymore. I was a man who had finally finished his most important project. I returned home in October. The air was crisp and the leaves were turning gold. Sheldon and Caroline picked me up from the airport in the Honda. They looked healthy and happy. On the drive back, they told me they were looking at a small house to buy in 2 years. They had a plan. They had savings. They had a life. We went back to my house for dinner. I had brought gifts for everyone. A wool sweater for Tommy, a leather journal for Emma, and a beautiful piece of pottery for Caroline and Sheldon. As we sat in my living room, the same room where the battle had been fought months ago, Tommy asked the question that made everything worth it. "Grandpa, are you proud of us now?" I looked at my daughter, who had found her strength. I looked at my son-in-law, who had found his honor. And I looked at my grandchildren, who had found the truth. "I am more than proud, Tommy," I said. "I am grateful." The revenge I'd started at that dinner table hadn't ended in a battlefield. It had ended in a sanctuary. I looked at Martha's photo on the mantel and gave her a small nod. The promise was kept. Not with $1 million, but with a hard-earned respect that would last far longer than any check I could ever write. I sat back in my chair and listened to the sound of my family talking. It was the sweetest music I'd ever heard. The project was complete, and for the first time in my retirement, I was truly, deeply at peace. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.